to me then, I bet they feel me now. Time don't let me lose it. The booth not about to prove it. I set goals and pursue it. You the best to never do it. Invest my money talking fluent, stupid, ducking the Judas. It broke my heart, but over my eyes, you have no honor, I have no choice. Chasing the commas till I'm gone. I've been left for a minute. On my way home, mama, I promise, got caught up in it. Damn. Everybody eats when I'm batting at the plate. First, second, third, home, $1 million base.
What's up, people? We back.
That Hotep Jesus dude.
Hotep, you're a genius. HotepJesus.com.
Hotep Jesus? I love that guy. He's terrific.
What's up, people? Real quick, shout out to my sponsor, Syscoin, the best of Bitcoin, the best of Ethereum. Great things happening. I'll be in Texas shortly with them. Look out for that news and that announcement coming soon. Also, I'll be at Bitcoin Miami. Look out for me at Bitcoin Miami. What else? menoforder.com, all things men and masculinity. Go to menoforder.com. And Hotep Con tickets are on sale right now. 3rd annual event that we have every year for our lovely viewers and our fans and our supporters. Come hang out with us. Hotep Con, go to hotepnation.com, get your tickets. That was the commercial you saw beforehand. Shout out to Trish helping me out with all of that. But today's guest is a very special one. Viva Frei is on the channel. What up, Viva?
Very, very special. Yes, I am very special. My mom says I'm special. Hotep, thank you for having me. And short notice, I was just watching you with Scott Adams.
Yeah.
It feels like yesterday. In fact, I think it might have been yesterday.
It was
if not yesterday, the day before. So short notice, and thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I saw your tweet. I thought it was interesting, fascinating, thought-provoking. We got in contact with each other, and we said it made sense to have this discussion publicly. I have people, like I told you, I have people texting me like, "Oh my God, you're talking to Viva." A lot of fans are tuning in. So shout out to the chat. If you guys want to participate in this chat, hit the super chat button. Stop grifting. Support the channel. And also support my 100% herbal nootropic at tribemasterfocus.com. I'll give you 50% off after you get your subscription. Just email me and I'll reduce that thing for you. So Viva, yeah, what'd you think about my chat with Scott Adams?
It was a good discussion. I mean, so Hotep, a little of the back drama. I do these weekly streams with Robert Barnes. And once upon a time, Scott Adams made a video about how he was wrong about the vaccines. And it's never clear with Scott if it's sarcasm, if it's trolling, if it's sincere. And I say that not as a criticism. That's kind of his brand. So he put out a video saying, congratulations, all you anti-vaxxers. But I mean, he means more like vaccine skeptics. You were right, but you made the right decision based on the wrong information. My partner in crime for the Sunday night streams, Robert, tweets out, Twitter's a harsher environment. I think he called him an idiot and said, look, you were wrong as well. And then Scott blocked Robert, but then Ricochet blocked me because I think he didn't want to see Robert through my retweets. So Scott blocked me, which is a shame. And it goes to show you the damage from a block, because I probably would have come out right away if I had heard about this, somewhat to the defense of Scott. And not that he needs people to defend him, but for anybody who knows Scott, his, stay away from black people monologue on his stream was quite clearly cynical, troll-ish, in the sense that he's saying, here's my conclusions, we should all stay away from each other if the Rasmussen poll is correct, and relying on Don Lemon's advice to, move to a richer, whiter community. So it was clearly trolling in that sense. And had I heard about this scandal when it occurred, probably would have come out and said something along those lines. So that's just the indirect risks of blocking. But I thought it was good. I mean, I think we understand what Scott wanted to do. Whether or not it's the wise, judicious thing to do, okay, it's up for debate. It depends what you want to accomplish in life.
Yeah.
And, maybe Scott's gotten to the point now where he's got FU money in the good sense that he wants to make a point instead of make a buck, but maybe the two will overlap to some degree anyhow.
Yeah, so it's a lot to unpack here. I know we're going to get into, the conservative, Dems must pay reparations argument, but I want to first start off with playing defense attorney for Scott Adams. I know you're in law Twitter, so this will be fun for me. I like to pretend I'm an attorney in my head. So here's my thing with Scott, right? When he said that, well, actually, I saw his tweet, and he said, "How are you guys supposed to know, to make the skeptic decision?" And I listed like a whole bunch of tweets that I made from like 2011 on, just about, the inoculations period. So we had the information was there. However, in Scott's defense, I think many people who were skeptics made a decision based upon no information, which is sort of could be construed as bad information, no?
Well, for sure. And full disclosure, I don't hide it. I don't boast it. I got 2 shots back in, 2021. I did it for very different reasons, but I did it predicated on not bad information or no information. I'll say wrong information in that my rationale, my thought process was how much harm can a little jibby jab cause? Like when you get an unnecessary vaccine for tetanus, other than inherent risks of any foreign body entering the body, which are typically speaking actually minimal, not 1 in 5,000 rare. I think how much damage could it cause? So I'll hedge my bets. My risks with COVID are minimal. My risks with this jibby jab, I thought at the time, were actually minimal. And I'm not a coward, but I was running for federal office in Canada, and I knew what would happen. I like, playing with the kids in the park because my kid was in the daycare across the street from where we used to live. And, if that, alt-right internet anti-vax guy infects a kindergarten class, well, damn well it's going to make the news. For right or for wrong, if it's right or if it's wrong, it'll make the news. And so I said, I hedged my bets and I did it. And I survived, touch wood, Pupukin and Aura. We'll see how long that survival lasts. So I did make the decision on the basis that how much damage could it cause? And now I know, if I knew then what I know now, I probably would not have, I would not have done it. So probably wouldn't have. So that is the rationale. It's like we were all thinking how much damage could it cause, and now we really know how much damage a badly designed vaccine, I call it the jab, can do.
Yeah. So I guess it was more of a political play for you to get the jibby jab, because if I understand you correctly, what you're basically saying is, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't, because if you didn't get it and a kid got infected, then you'd be a culprit. You'd be implicated in the result. And if you did get it, at least you can say, well, hey, I got it. So even if you did infect a kid, so you can't.
True. Even if I suffered any physical consequences, well, I'd say, okay, at least you can't blame a kid getting the Rona from me on that, because I did what I had to do. We did not know at the time, because the bastard lying scumbags at Pfizer didn't even tell us. They weren't even testing for transmission. So they didn't even know. They knew that they could not say it prevented transmissibility, but that wasn't what we were being told at the time. I just, it was predicated on that. And I can appreciate people say, Viva, you're either an idiot, a coward, you took the easy way out. That's all fine and well. I took the risks with my own body. And even when I did it, never compelled, never supported, never tolerated the overt discrimination from those towards those who didn't get it. I made a stupid decision based on the available information at the time, without the requisite skepticism at the time. And I have unfortunately gotten far more skeptical Hotep over the last 3 years.
So, I do want to get to the Scott Adams thing, but I just want to find some clarity in this conversation. Where do you stand on it? Do you think that the jab is good for some people, all people, no people? Where are you on that?
The science behind it, I'll stay away from certain aspects of the science, whether or not the early iteration or the first iteration might have been useful for the first strain or the first few strains. Mm-hmm. My philosophy is do whatever the hell you want. but compelling other people to do it is outright wrong. As relates to this jab now, if you are sticking it in your kids 6 months and over, you've got a screw loose in your head. If you decide to do it to yourself for whatever the reason, that's your choice. More power to you. But what we know now, it's not just useless for the better part of the population. It's actually harmful. In my view, full disclaimer, I'm just a lawyer who happens to know how to digest information and listen to experts. And every bad adverse potential effect that we were told was conspiracy theory 2 years ago has been proven to be true, which means I don't trust a bloody word the so-called experts who pushed this in the first place have to say, and I defer a lot more to the skeptics who have been proven right over time.
Yeah, shout out to the Hoteps. Hotep's been told you.
It wasn't because people weren't telling me at the time. People were saying, first of all, I didn't have the knowledge that I have now to even digest some of the information that I was being given. Some of it seemed a little outlandish to me at the time. But my basic premise was, how much harm could this little thing possibly cause? And boy, howdy, do we know now. And I'm just, I'm glad I only made certain decisions for myself and not for other people that the care of whom is entrusted to me as a parent. And so that's it. Got to live with those consequences.
Yeah.
Now.
Well, you don't know what you don't know, and hindsight is 20/20. But to know is better than to not know. So I'm glad you're here now. But again, is Scott wrong when he said the majority of people made that decision based upon bad information? And I think there's a loophole there, right? Because what is the bad information? Because there's a lot of bad information that was perpetuated by skeptics.
I don't want to strawman or misrepresent anything Scott might have said back in the day. There's a difference between making a bad decision based on bad information and compelling that decision on others. And that's where the distinction has always lied. Make a bad decision. Like some of us make bad decisions in full awareness of fact. We'll smoke, we'll drink, and that's it. That's our decision. But the idea that they were compelling this when there was insufficient information on others and predicating overt discrimination on people within society was where it went from you're free to make your own dumb decision if you don't have information, and we can laugh at you afterwards if people are inclined to do that, versus you're going to tell me that I can't go into a coffee shop or a department store or a movie theater unless I show you my papers to have subjected my own body to this experimental gene therapy, which is what they were calling it back in the day, and I didn't even appreciate that. That's where the distinction is. You can make a bad decision, but you can't force a potentially bad decision on others, and that's where a lot of people went very wrong.
Where were you when it first came about? Because you said you got it. Were you one of the people who were telling people, you're a dope if you don't get it? Or was it a private decision? Or
I went back to my tweets. But for my mistakes, I'm thankful that it's a question of principle. I was judging everybody who was imposing this on people. And people say, well, how can you be they try to equate it to abortion, but that's a separate discussion. But no, I never for one day tolerated vaccine mandates. I never supported the lockdowns, even though I participated for 2 weeks when we were told it was 2 weeks to flatten the curve. Yeah. So my mistake was purely my mistake. But I supported the principle that no one should have ever been subjected to this in the first place. And I fought for those people's rights because I ran for literally federal office in my riding in Westmount, Notre-Dame-de-Grâce in Montreal. And I think I was as vocal as could be with the information I had at the time. And as more information develops and as I gather more information, I become even more vocal. But I was vocal back in the day. Vaccine passports, it's overt discrimination and more specific discrimination based on demographics of groups who are reluctant to submit to government compulsion, specifically because what governments have done to them in the past. In Canada, Justin Trudeau, literally, in the summer of 2021, was on an apology tour for the residential schooling systems in Canada that his government, previous governments implemented, which was, taking Indigenous kids from their families, putting them in these religious institutions for assimilation. The government experimented on them. The government tortured them. The government abused them. And the government knew about it. And this went on until the 90s. And Justin Trudeau was on an apology tour for past atrocities committed by his predecessors. His own father, by the way, was one of those prime ministers back in the 70s that partook in this, while compelling this, another form of experimentation on the population in real time, on the most vulnerable. So I was vocal about it, but that was the context.
Yeah, I definitely want to read up on that. That sounds crazy.
The residential school system in Canada is it's misrepresented in the media. You know, they talk about mass graves, and they're not quite. It's not what the media describes it as, because they want to paint it as something they just discovered in August 2021. They had known about it for decades. The mass graves were cheap graves because, you know, these kids were dying in such large numbers. A lot of disease, which affected a lot of people at the time, but was worse in these schools. But residential schooling, look into it. It's you had something similar in the States, but just the irony. As the government is apologizing for past government abuse experimentation on vulnerable and minorities, they're doing it and compelling it again in real time for the greater good again.
As they're apologizing for their past crime. Yeah, absolutely ridiculous. But I want to say, you know, admirable take for you to stand up for human rights, and I appreciate that. And I'm sure the Hotep community appreciates that. Let's talk about my interview with Scott Adams. When Scott Adams said what he said, my initial reaction, you know, Miss Graham over at Fox News has called me a provocateur. So maybe that's why I'm able to pick up on other provocateurs is like really easy. So when I first saw it, I don't know if you saw my reaction video, but I was laughing hysterically. I thought what Scott Adams said was hilarious. And I just thought that, you know, any person with 2 brain cells at work knew you can't say something like that on the internet, which to me was an indication that he was not being serious. But the fact that he was able to say it with a straight face is what made me just crack up. How did you perceive what Scott said?
So this is where Scott gets into the trouble, because I'd say for the first portion of it, it's clear that it's a troll, because he says, well, if that Rasmussen poll is correct, then I'm part of a hate group. Well, first of all, you got to back it up. It's predicated on Scott having identified as Black. Now, I heard his explanation for that, and I'll say, look, there's a difference between identifying with a community versus identifying as a community. And I know that what Scott means behind all of that is he identifies with the Black community. Scott will identify with a community where he thinks an injustice has been committed. But in the satirical sense, he says, I identify as Black, which is the most preposterous thing on earth, because he's whiter than, what's her name? Dolezal?
Rachel Dolezal, the beautiful African Black queen. Yes.
And I wholeheartedly believe there are people out there who can sincerely believe I identify as Black, as, you know, as whatever, even if they are genetically, physiologically not of that group. But Scott, it was clearly a troll.
Well, can we pause right there really fast?
Absolutely.
I just want to know where your stance is. Do you think that men can identify as women? And women identify as men?
In the sense of it being a form of gender dysphoria or gender dysmorphia, I always get mixed up which one. Yeah, it's in the DSM-5 and it's been in the manual for a long time. It's a form of, you know, people say mental issue and then, or mental illness, and then it has this whole stigma to it. But it is a diagnosable mental condition and has been throughout time. The severe discomfort of being in your own body. And then the only question is, how do you deal with it? How do you treat it? How do you cater to those people? And what do you do to help those people insofar as they want help? And if they don't want help and they just want acceptance, well, you don't discriminate against people on the basis of mental issues in the first place.
Yeah.
So how do I feel? It's of course it's a thing. And I know some people are going to say, well, homosexuality was also described as a mental disorder at one point in time. True. And there is a certain evolution to things, but the idea, I mean, dysphoria, dysmorphia in general, whether it's someone who feels fat and becomes bulimic, I mean, you don't cater to that. What you try to do is help to the extent that they want help, or you can't help someone who doesn't want to help themselves. And if it's something that is not ultimately destructive like bulimia, well, then acceptance, and that's it. So I believe people feel that way. Then the question just becomes, and I was not trolling, but needling a liberal politician. If someone who is clearly a man or a woman says, refer to me as what I am clearly not, like a clear me, if I were to tell you, refer to me as she, that's where I think we start getting into a very big problem, because then it's not a question of you accepting me for what I think I am. It's me compelling you to treat me differently than what you think I am, which is where, the whole debate between acceptance of homosexuality back in the day and the gay rights movement is fundamentally different than the trans LGBTQ2IA+ movement. Gay rights was leave me alone, let me do what I want to do. And the trans movement is more, you do what I say, and you talk to me the way I tell you to talk to me. And not just that, you refer to me the way I want you to refer to me when I'm not even there, when you're talking about me with third parties. So one is leave me alone, let me live my life. And the other one is you live your life the way I'm telling you to live your life. And that's the difference between freedom and oppression of sorts.
Yeah, I get that. I'm not sure if the T stuff is in the DSM-5 or 4. But I think the 5 has been updated, and it might not include T people. I'm not sure. But
I think it does, because I looked just to make sure, but it's been in there regardless since for decades. But historically, it's been a thing. People feeling acute discomfort, being in their own bodies. And the only question is, how do you deal with it?
So, but mainstream is probably going to issue a DSM-6 and remove it, right? It's becoming normalized. So I say, if we're going to accept this, then we have to accept our transracial brethren and sistren.
Well, I think if a DSM-7 comes around and then says, well, we don't want to discriminate against suicidal ideations. Who are you to tell someone else how to live their life? And we're not going to call it depression anymore. So good. They'll come out with a DSM-7. It's just going to carry absolutely zero weight when the scientific community is telling you things which are demonstrably, verifiably incongruous with reality. So DSM-8 can come out and say, a biological male born with a penis, you have to refer to that person as a she if they identify. Okay, good. See what happens to the practice of psychology, psychiatry, and medicine if we get to that point. At some point, it's the death of reason when the science and the experts tell you things which are fundamentally contrary to basic logic, basic reason.
Okay. All right, we're gonna move on, but first, I just want to say, I do accept Rachel Dolezal into our community. Sean King, I'm going to pass on. He's a no. I'm going to deny him access.
What about Justin Trudeau, Hotep?
Absolutely denying him access as well, even though he's put on the blackface, and especially because he put on the blackface.
And the other thing is these. Someone's personal choice is their personal choice, but it's their freedom ends when it becomes a compulsion on someone else and a dictate on someone else's conduct, behavior, and thought.
Yes. No, I can totally agree with that. Okay, so cool. So Scott identified as black. Continue from there. I'm sorry, because I cut you off.
Oh, yeah, so that's right. So let's all accept that was something of a troll, but a good-natured troll to illustrate the absurdity, but also to highlight the fact that Scott was active in righting what he perceived to be social wrongs. Then he goes off and says what he says. At the beginning, it's clearly, and anybody who knows would have known, it's a troll. He's relying on the Rasmussen poll. He's relying on the words of Don Lemon, a black man who, by the way, once upon a time, 10 years ago, put out a video that said pretty much exactly what Scott Adams was saying. Study, don't have kids out of wedlock. This is advice that's true of everybody. It's not the idea that someone looks at that and says that's targeting one community over another. That might show the internal preconceptions of the individual hearing it, not of the individual saying it. But where Scott got into trouble is he then, goes from the troll and says, here's my lived life experience. I've tried to help the black community. They don't seem to want to accept the help, yada, yada. Therefore, and that's where some people say, okay, Scott actually took this personally. He felt slighted, and this was not a troll. This was how he actually feels and lives. And that's where he got into the trouble, because it's just not clear enough.
Right.
But satire, troll, and the other thing is people are going to say he meant it. Now, what I'll say is Scott is right in principle, but wrong in the description of it. And anybody Scott's main point, by the way, and he's not wrong. Everybody's gotten mad at him for what he said, but nobody contradicted it. Nobody provided arguments to refute his conclusions.
Right.
The only thing I would say to that is what Scott said is true of classism, of class, and not true of race. And when Scott says, I'm going to live in a white neighborhood away from blacks. Well, I mean, and when he quoted Don Lemon was saying, look, affluent is what is meant by that, not racially homogeneous. And I was talking with my wife about it. I was like, we used to do a lot of camping. We've been to campgrounds. There was not a black person in sight. And we walked in there and said, holy crap, we're not staying here, because it's not a question. Have you seen Harold and Kumar go to White Castle?
No, I haven't.
Or was it Escape from Guantanamo Bay? It was one of the two, where Harold and Kumar, the whole movie is predicated on racial relations, and it's classic. The first one was better than the second one was great also, but either way. And Harold is Asian, Kumar is Indian, and they're going through, the inner city. And I think Kumar says to Harold, don't be racist. Don't be scared of that guy. He says, like, I'm not scared of the guy because he's black. I'm scared of the guy because he's scary. And so this idea that predicating it on race is where I think it goes wrong. It's class, which might, some people are going to say is no better, but people want to live in good neighborhoods. People want to, camp at good campgrounds. People want to, not be around people who they are fearful of, not based on race, but based on their other elements of fear. And then the only argument is going to become, well, whether or not in the history of America, there's an overlap between impoverished neighborhoods and impoverished communities and racism as a whole. And that's where the debate becomes more nuanced than satire trolling on YouTube and tweets on Twitter.
Yeah, well, when I looked at the poll, I said this with Scott. I said I would love to see what that breakdown of just the black community would look like. Figure we polled all 40 odd million of us, but then broke it down by gender, economic status, income, right? Level of income, and region, right? Because that matters too, right? And I think that the numbers might look different. I believe that the lower class and the upper class would be like, yo, it's perfectly okay to be white. And I think it'd be the middle class that would skew more towards it's not okay being white, mostly because they're the most educated and indoctrinated. I don't know if that's real or not. It's a guess. It's all anecdotal. I could be completely wrong, to be honest with you. But you said in one way Scott was right, and you said in another way he was wrong. Can you clarify that for me? In what way was he right? What way was he wrong?
He's right in the sense that we want to live in good neighborhoods. You want to get good real estate. You want to be next to a good school system. Yeah. He's wrong in the sense that he ostensibly, and for what he's getting in trouble, says, well, that I'm breaking that down based on living with whites versus living with blacks. I can tell Scott, and Scott could say for himself, there's a lot of low income housing. It'll be all white where he'll say, I'm not living there either. And so in that sense, it's provocative to say whites need to stay away from blacks. But what he means to say is, and he'd live by it too, I'll stay away from whites if I think the neighborhood is not one that is amenable to the type of lifestyle that I want and the type of community that I want. Yeah. And now the whole thing about the poll, and I don't know how the question was asked and what people understood by it, but if you predicate that poll on the premises that the statement, it's okay to be white, is fundamentally racially infused and has that trope of a response to Black Lives Matter, well, then you're predetermining the outcome. Yeah. You may as well just ask, poll Black Americans and say, do you support racism? They're obviously going to say no. So they phrase that question, from what I can tell, in a manner that basically the racism is baked into the question that they're asking. And so the response is, yeah, of course, I don't think using it's okay to be white as a racial trope or as a response, as an antagonistic response to Black Lives Matter is okay. You're going to get that result. Ask anybody and all members of an identifiable community. Would you prefer to live with your community or in a different community, racial, religious, whatever? And I suspect the answer is going to be majority. Yeah, all things being equal, I feel more comfortable in my community. I can predict the practices. I know the norms, et cetera, et cetera. So this Rasmussen poll, and it's my problem with these, I can swear on your channel. Yeah, go ahead. With these fucking pollsters, it's intended to create strife. It's intended to create divide. Yeah. And it's intended to provoke and exacerbate racial relations in the United States because they're already strained. They're more strained than I've ever seen in my entire life. And they make their money off of this. And I say this, look, everyone knows confession through projection on my channel. That is a grift. When people refer to people as grifters, creating the strife so you can profit from it, asking that question is deliberately provocative, and it is to create the division so they can then work off that division. But if you were to ask just a broad statement, okay, look, all things being equal, you want to live with communities that you know the practices of, everybody's going to say yes, unless you like adventure. And then you might say, I don't care. Ask anybody the question, would you like to live in an affluent neighborhood, regardless of race? Everyone will say yes. I mean, so... Yeah,
I agree. Did you want to finish? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I was going to say, am I going to lower my camera a touch? I hate doing this in real time. Yeah. Oh, okay. I'm not even going to push it more than that. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, so we have the Grifties, and to us, the Grifties is like the Force in Star Wars, where you have the light side and you have the dark side, okay? And you've been nominated for the Grifties. I've been nominated. Matter of fact, go vote for me, grifties.com. Go vote for me. It's a damn shame I haven't even won a nomination yet, you people. So go vote for me, you people. Go vote for me at grifties.com and go vote for Viva Frei.
Let's see who's up there now.
Yeah. So I get what you're saying with the whole grifty thing. It's very grifty what the media did. It's deceptive. It's divisive. And I was more upset at the poll than anything else because I knew what the poll was trying to do. Mm-hmm. However, do you think what Scott Adams did was productive for, propelling the race conversation into the mainstream media so more people could have these conversations? Or do you think it was more destructive and counterproductive to resolving race relations in America?
That's a tough question because I don't want to.
It is a tough question
because it also it's I don't want to look like I'm talking about Scott behind his back, and I would have this discussion with Scott any day of the week.
Yeah,
I don't think what Scott did is going to be damaging or any more damaging to racial relations. I think at the end of the day, it will probably be, in fact, net positive because you get Scott Adams and Hotep sitting down to discuss race relations. That's how things get better. At the end of the day, I think things get better by not talking about it day in and day out, because when all you do is talk about the differences, you create these not distinctions, because everybody knows a black person looks different than a white person, but at the end of the day, when it's not the fundamental aspect of identity and all things political, mm-hmm. that's when you have harmony. Mm-hmm. And that's what it was in my mind, in my memory, in the early 2000s in Canada, before Justin Trudeau, before talking about it all day long in the sense that they're different and we need to treat them differently. That's the basis of discrimination. Yeah. As opposed to there's Jewish Canadians, Black Canadians, Asian, and they're Canadians. And what makes us a people is our philosophical differences, philosophical similarities. So I think, Scott, it'll be value added because it's creating discussions like this and allowing people to meet who would otherwise never meet. Mm-hmm. Where it's going to be destructive is that the media is going to run with it and continue to use it as a divide now to demonize white people and anyone who agrees with Scott as a white nationalist, whatever. And at the end of the day, it might empower some groups to say, look, see, Scott Adams said it, without really understanding the underlying point, which was, I don't think Scott was saying, I want to live with whites and not blacks. I think what he was saying is basically, we all want to live in good neighborhoods. There might be some statistical, not overrepresentation, underrepresentation, and issues that need to be addressed. Whether or not one views the manner in which they need to be addressed as purely economical or fundamentally underlying, racial, that's another discussion. But it'll be value added. In the long run, but Scott's going to eat some, he's going to suffer some consequences as a result.
Yeah, I think what Scott did was he put his feet in a straw man's shoes and said, okay, I know what this poll is trying to do. And here's what the poll is trying to do. I'm going to stand in the shoes of the person that this poll is targeting. And this poll is trying to destroy race relations. So he's saying, here's how someone would respond to the poll. They would say, based upon this information, I better get the hell away from black people. So he was playing, he was doing a little bit of role playing is how I perceived his provocative stunt. Now you said we shouldn't talk, maybe we shouldn't talk about race relations. What should we talk about instead? What do you think is more important to talk about?
Well, so this is where, this is the complexity of the issue, and race relations is I'll say it's a toxic subject in the States, even more so, well, it's exponentially more so than in Canada, but it's getting there in Canada. Your question is going to lead me to asking you a question. The 1350 arguments, which we live on the internet, you see it all the time, 1350, and I didn't know what it was at first, and then I'm like, okay, what is it? Now I know. When people refer to the 1350, and that's the idea that the black population in America represents 13.5% and is responsible for 50% of certain types of violent crimes. And so people take that statistic, which, I mean, at the end of the day, you can argue with statistics, but they may be demonstrably verifiable. The question then becomes, is that statistic because of race, or is that because of class? And is the overlap there, or the underlying explanation, one of race, that, which I'm sure you're going to get? People say the 1350 shows that Black Americans, and they'll make up physiological explanations to say, what's the word, when you don't have control over your immediate responses to things, impulse control. You'll have people say, well, there's biological differences that account for that. And then you'll have the people who go a little bit deeper and say, this is fundamentally, economical issues, growing up with single parent households, which some people are going to say, well, look, that's predominantly the statistical overrepresentation within certain demographics. The discussion that has to be had is it innate to races and religions? And the answer to that is, it can be demonstrably shown to be false. Or is it cultural to some extent and economic to a greater extent? Because you can go to a lot of impoverished other neighborhoods and see the same problems. But in the oversimplified, hyper-racial discussion, that nuance never gets into, because people say, look, that's it. And now, like Scott Adams was playing the role, stay away because there's no solution to this. Well, anybody who says, I'm going to go live with whites, any white person who says that, I can probably find a lot of places where you all white, and you'll say, well, heck, I'm not living there either. So that's
I live near Asians. So if I see white people, I'm a little bit concerned. To me, white people are the new niggas. Did you have a question for me? You said it might turn into a question.
So I was going to ask you in the interview. I'll get the two questions. This one, where you said the 1350. That stat that we all know, like disregard. Well, you didn't get into it in the interview, and I was interested in what would be your response to that. The Steelman response to that.
To the 13 and 50 stat. Yeah. Well, it's a bit misleading. When you take the number 13 and you put it next to 50, it sort of insinuates that all Black people are committing a crime, like 50% of the population is committing the crime. And it's like, well, if 50%, I think the stat now is actually 13 and 60. If 60% of the population of America were violent, this country would look a lot different. It'd look like a war-torn area. So it's a bit misleading. I think it's better to say that, 50% of crimes, of violent crimes committed are by the Black population. And then, they try to throw the 13 in there. We're 13% of the population. So we over-index for violent crimes. And like you said, we could definitely get into the nuance of why it's like that. But I think it's very misleading to say that, the 50% part, it's sort of.
Well, I mean, actually, and I think we sort of agree on the variation of that, which is like that statistic is used then to say, well, I can make predictive determinations of an individual based on race, and or broad not stereotypes, but rather broad generalizations of the entire race based on what is statistical overrepresentation, without actually. People can disagree with me, but I think it's fundamentally economical or economics. It's fundamentally money. I mean, it's economics at the end of the day. Now, some people are going to say,
I misspoke. I said 50% of the population. I meant 13% of the population. If 13% of the population were all violent, it might get a little weird in this country. But continue.
No, that's well. I was just going to say, someone might look at me and say, Viva, the reason why there's economic discrepancies among the Black community in the States, which accounts for that, is the historical racism, et cetera. That's where you're at least getting to the underlying issues where people might fundamentally disagree. Yeah. Why would it be that 50% of violent crime has statistical overrepresentation of a demographic that represents 13%? Look for all your reasons. And then the question at the end of the day is, okay, reasons are one thing. What are going to be the solutions? And the solutions, like Don Lemon said, it's the solutions for everybody. It's not the solutions targeting one race, one ethnicity. Yeah. There are certain time-tested true things as to, how to stay relatively wealthy, how to stay out of trouble. It's, stay in school, keep your schmeckle in your pants, don't get divorced, and don't have kids out of wedlock. I mean, those are the fundamentals. But it's when people say, well, this statistical overrepresentation is racially based, as in genetically racially based. Well, that's where you get into the distinction between different groups of
But
people.
I would like to see the stat based upon the real numbers, right? So, how much of the population is committing violent crime that is black, right? It's not 13%. Not all 13% of the population, or not 100% of the black population is committing violent crimes. I've never committed a violent crime, right? So not all of us are doing this. It's a very small portion of our community that's doing this. And when you look at that, for example, if we were to take that stat and we were to separate it out by level of income, you'd find out it's all poor people, right? Or majority poor people, right? So, like I said, that's why I think taking the 13 and putting it next to the 50 is misleading. You know, look at the numbers. Let's look at the real numbers and find out what portion of the population is that. Is that 1%? Then I would accept it if you said, okay, it's 1 in 50, right? Because is it 1% or even what percent of the black population is committing these violent crimes? You know.
Well, I was going to say almost ironically, where political correctness ruins authority is you might have trouble getting the accurate statistics now. I think. Am I wrong, or did the FBI stop making the breakdown because it might have been politically inconvenient to do it?
Yeah.
And so that I'm not even sure that they're making that distinction anymore. But at the end of the day, I appreciate that distinction. It's one that ought to be made to understand the numbers.
Yeah.
Bottom line, though, I don't think many people disagree that there is a problem with statistical overrepresentation.
Yeah.
And then the only question is, what are you attributing that overrepresentation to? Is it biological by the nature? And I think that can be proven to be wrong because there's plenty of black communities where you don't have those issues.
Yeah.
And so if you set aside that it's like inherently biological, well, then it's going to be cultural. It'll be economical. Then the question is going to be, is that because blacks have been treated a certain way in the States, since its inception?
Yeah.
Some people might think that. Others might say there's a slew of other contributing factors, but at the end of the day, what's the bottom line solution to it?
Yeah.
And that all gets lost in the fray because people are too busy calling other people racist for referring to statistics, and because others actually try to take those stats and then run them for nefarious political purposes.
So let's look at the far right. So you have a far right black community, you have a far right white community, and they're very much almost identical. So the same way this far right white group would say blacks are genetically predisposed to violence, the far right black groups say white people are genetically predisposed to violence, right? And so I come from that far right group. I have since left because I came to my senses. And although there is a vast amount of evidence to support the claim that white people are genetically predisposed to violence, we look at the pogroms of Europe, when we look at the Holocaust, when we look at King Leopold and the Ma'afa of Africa, and the continuation of murder and violence in the African continent and the diaspora, there is a feasible argument to say, white people are predisposed to violence. But I don't agree with that. Just because there's some stats there that say, well, look how many people white people killed. I'm looking at it and I'm like, well, what do all of these murderers have in common? And I think what they all have in common is power, being of the upper class, having access to government and military. And that, like King Leopold, he's a king. He's at the top of he's at the top of the hierarchy. So, does King Leopold represent all white people? Does Hitler represent all Germans? Does Stalin represent all Russians? You can't say that, right? I don't think that's fair, because the majority of white people don't think like that. They just want to go along and get along,
What you're describing, this is what racism is it's viewing everything through racial blinders. The far right of the whites are going to say blacks are predisposed to violence. The far right of the, they'll say, you know what the reality is? Some humans are predisposed to violence, and you've had atrocities committed by whites, by blacks, by Asians, the Japanese treatment of the Chinese treatment of the Uyghurs. Every group has its members which are prone to violence. When you go into a social level, the question is if there are statistical overrepresentations in certain areas, because the 1350 statistic is taking violent crime, take economic crime. And I'm sure you'll find another stat which is far less catchy, because there is something fundamentally worse, in general, about violent crime than financial crimes.
Yeah.
But if you go check out financial crimes, what would that stat look like? I mean, I don't want to say anything that's going to get me in trouble.
I'm not touching that one.
You should. I can allude to it. You might see some overrepresentations in there. Okay, fine. People are going to give that one a pass because it's not violent crime. It's just financial crimes. But
yeah,
some humans are prone to violence.
Yeah.
Now the question is, what are the solutions to it? And typically, make people not rich but wealthier, and get the frickin' government out, and you'll tend to reduce those numbers.
Yeah.
But I wanted to, now you reminded me, I wanted to ask you the question. This goes back to the reparations part of the discussion with Scott Adams as well. And I don't know where you're serious about the reparations part and not serious. I went back and watched the video of the Starbucks. I forgot how funny that was, but watching it, is there any truth in the jest, as they say? And do you support any idea of reparations as a legitimate, as an actual policy, or was that too sort of a troll to show the absurdity of trying to right historical wrongs that might not be able to be righted without creating current injustices themselves?
I support all citizens who have a gripe with government, no matter race or whatever, right? When I look at there's this great book written by a socialist about the United States. I can't remember his name, but I mean, he's just listing out the crimes. One of them was like the Ludlow massacre, where they commissioned the National Guard and murdered a whole bunch of white folks out in Colorado, right? So when I look at 1913, when I look at 1933, when I look at just some of the practices carried out by the financial institutions in America, 2008, I think there's a ton of people that can make a case for reparations. I am not in a position where I would, in any stretch of the imagination, could see myself choosing the government over people. I would choose the people over the government. When it comes to reparations, I have a lot of different opinions. Do you want to go through them?
Yeah, please. Because this is, by the way, the bridging of the divide. When you get down to the understanding of it, where most people are actually going to agree. But when the media says reparations, it's about white Americans paying back black Americans, and that creates the divide. And I know where you're going, or at least I can see where you're going, and I like it. Yeah, please.
Yeah. So let's start with my evolution. So initially, I was against it. And I was against it because I thought it promoted a victim mentality amongst the black community. I thought that it would delay our rise in socioeconomic status, because, while we're spending resources trying to get these reparations from the government, it's an opportunity cost situation. You could be doing something else and just building from within. So I had that attitude for a really long time. And then as I matured, I just moved into this, individuals have free will. And I support all individuals to have that free will. And, I wrote this white paper called The Patriot Report, Unmasking the Conspiracy of Money and War. And when I started looking at all the banking crimes in America through the central banking system, I was like, whoa, they obliterated the First, the Fourth Amendment, the 10th Amendment. Like, they just obliterated the Constitution. I'm talking about in the 1800s. So now you're like, why don't we have any rights? I'm like, you could look at Maryland versus McCullough and all these other different cases, right? And I know you're familiar with a lot of this case law. So, so I looked at it and I'm like, well, who am I to say that a group of people cannot create a committee and commission the government to give some reparations? Now, the reparations conversation is very nuanced because there's so many different groups that represent it. So sometimes you might look at the FBAs under Tariq Nasheed, or you look at another group under Lord Abba. Like, there's different factions of reparations. There's different factions of Black Americans, and depending on whose lens you look through, and that's the thing sometimes with I call them red whites or white people in America, they see like Tariq Nasheed and they think like, oh, he's the totality of how black people feel about reparations. And it's not true. So these different factions, for example, you have one faction that'll say this is for slavery, right? And for me, I'm like, I can see how that could trickle down and it could hurt you over a long period of time. But I side more with other groups who say, nah, this has to do with like legitimate racism from the government. For example, World War I, black people weren't allowed to participate in the war, right? Which I thought was a good thing, actually. But also when we look at LBJ's policies, right? And his integration policies and the civil rights, like all of that stuff destroyed the black community. You know, it wasn't the Tulsa massacre that destroyed the Tulsa. It was really like a lot of these integration policies, forced integration, et cetera, et cetera. But when we look at Vietnam War, that's the one I really like to pinpoint because so many black men went to the Vietnam War and came back with mental illnesses. And to deal with the gruesomeness of that war, they chose drugs. And then they start the RICO laws and all these other different laws. I think, what's the other law that Nixon started? I forget. I can't remember, but all these laws came in. So you sent the black men off to war. They come back with drug addictions. And then now you lock them up after they fought the war for you, instead of, you know, trying to remedy the situation another way. Then you had Biden come in and he had several crime bills. Then you had Clinton and he put the cap on the crime bill. Then you have Democrats pushing immigration, and that's really taking away some of the lower wage jobs because you got the immigrants coming in. So when you factor in all of the mismanagement by government and then include the mismanagement by the United States Treasury, Janet Yellen now, Jerome Powell, the SEC, Gary Gensler, I could make a case for reparations for a lot of different types of people.
Well, that I think is like something that not anyone would disagree with. In conceptually, is the government's screwed at every, throughout its history, pretty much every group, every demographic in different ways.
Yes.
And now people get angry with this because they say, well, the black experience in the States is singularly unique because they were the only group that was, a formal slave trade. The Irish raised the argument of indentured servants who weren't even property back in the day. But when you go through it like that, I mean, people understand, or should understand, the government has screwed pretty much everybody. And if the idea is to say anybody with a historical grievance against the government can seek reparations, I think that kind of exists as a concept anyhow. But where it becomes the divisive and ultimately racially disharmonious discussion is reparations for Black Americans, and white Americans have to pay it. And then you got the Irish white Americans saying, well, what about us? Then you get, I won't pick any other groups. What about us? And that's, I mean, and that is the ultimate counterproductive aspect to all of it, is focusing on one group where, bringing it back to the Jewish side of things, where I understand people's grievances, where it seems that, Jews have, we've on the one hand gotten reparations from the German government for this atrocity. It's much more recent and it's much more tangible in that, there's actually still artwork out there that belongs to some people that was stolen. But then you got, Armenians saying, well, what about our genocide? Like, we want reparations too. And then you have some of the groups overlapping saying, we're not recognizing that genocide. We're petitioning for recognition and reparations for the Jewish genocide, but not the Armenians. And then you just see it's not reparations for citizens. It's the distinction between which citizens have the right to reparations where you get the problem. But yeah, look.
Well, I think it comes back to, what is the strength of your organization and your committees? Because when we look at the different reparation factions, these are formal committees, right? Incorporated, et cetera, et cetera. So, in that way, yes, and then not like if we look at California, they're not including all Black people in that California reparations. Like, they are very specific about who gets that reparations. I damn sure wouldn't be included, even if I was a citizen of California. So, and if you look at the reparations people, bro, I'm telling you, it's not what you think it is. It's very much exclusive.
What I can guarantee you it is virtue signaling at a political level, and someone could say, look, I supported reparations, even if it didn't address the issue, and B, caused more strife, not just between Blacks and white Americans, but even within the Black community itself. Yeah, no, it's the idea of I think the whole discourse is done specifically to divide and specifically just to get cheap virtue signaling points at the political scale. But
we have to look at those segments. They're different segments. When I talk about these committees, I'm talking about an all-black committee. I'm not talking about the Democrats who like to leech off of these all-black committees and then use it for their political gain. Those people are definitely using it for political advantage. I think the big problem that a lot of these committees have, the all-black reparations committee have, is they scream reparations and everybody's like, no, you shouldn't get reparations. White people have to pay for it. And then we look at Ukraine and we're like, yo, Ukraine's getting a big bag right now.
Can you imagine? I mean, when you talk about the Vietnam soldiers, and I would say that I wouldn't necessarily view that through the racial lens necessarily, but I would understand, not only did Black Americans come back with mental, trauma, then you have was it the FBI or the CIA running, it's crack selling within LA, which is definitely demographically targeted. But can you imagine what the world can find, what the governments can find to fund foreign conflict?
Right.
I was talking with Jimmy Dore. He was on a couple of weeks ago. And, Jimmy, I think, is not under the illusion that universal healthcare is hunky-dory up in Canada, but supports universal healthcare. And I'm like, well, look what's happening in Canada. It's not quite as utopic as we think it is. But if the argument is, well, if we can find $100 billion to send to Ukraine to finance war, death, and destruction,
yes,
and you can't put that $100 billion, that would take care of healthcare. Let people who want to pay, and let those who can't have access. So, yeah, there's
that's the lens that these groups are looking at it through. It's like, well, you find budgets for any and everything, but as soon as Black people have their hand out, and I can't really argue with that, right? Because you say, should white people pay for it, right? So my argument was, I actually don't want any money. I just want tax exemption for me and any corporation I'm a majority owner of.
That's a decent solution, because you'll have other people's. First of all, it's also a way of shrinking the size of a bloody corrupt government. Like, less taxes. The government is the only entity that fails up, that gives itself a promotion every time it screws up. And I think anybody who says cut funding to the government will have you'll have their support, and that's something that can apply equally, mutatis mutandis, to a slew of other demographics.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to say, with the idea, you discussed it with Scott, and again, I think it might be more tongue in cheek than serious. I don't think conservatives would support a make Dems pay. As a principle, and I'll say this, I should say this, I don't really go by the political distinction of Democrat versus Republicans. I am now operating on the blue pill versus the red pill, and the blue pills think government can still do good, or the government is good, more government is better. So I'll say red pill, blue pill. I think the red pill side does not believe in compelling any citizen to support a program that they don't believe in. And so I don't think that's a plausible solution. A principled red pilled individual who were, calling Republican, I don't think would tolerate a policy that says Democrats pay. If that Democrat says, I'm not paying for reparations either, I'm a second generation Eastern European, what did I have to do with slavery in America? So that was my only other beef or gripe.
Yes, and I would totally agree with that. But let's take a look, right? Let's take a look here. Who's this guy? LBJ? What was LBJ? It's goddamn Democrat. LBJ, this is the guy who played that racist film in the White House and then turned around and imposed the same policies that destroyed the Black community. Democrats must pay. If we look at just the overall policies in the Black community, who runs those Black communities, mostly run by Democrats. I'm talking about the Democratic National Committee. I'm talking about the Democratic Party specifically. I'm talking about the politicians specifically. I'm not talking about the citizens. I'm talking about the institution of Democrat policies. I'm talking about the fact that Democrats are the party of the KKK and are the party of slavery. This is what I am talking about. The long lineage of racism is traced throughout the Democratic Party. In fact, the Republican Party was originally favorable to Blacks. So I'm ready to absolve almost 100% of Republicans of any of this and wholly put this on the donors and the base of Democrats. Also, when we look at corporations that like to posture in favor of Black people today, especially when we talk about Silicon Valley, Well, what were black people complaining about for the last 10 to 20 years? They couldn't get jobs in tech. They couldn't get jobs at many of these major corporations, but these major corporations are run by liberals, and these are billionaires, which comes to my next point. When we look at slavery, we already have admissions from banks and insurance companies. Barclays is an example, who have come out and said, we are sorry for this. I'm not ready to make white people pay. What I am saying is we already have admissions on the books from banks and insurance companies, Prudential being another one, who have admitted their hand and their role in slavery. So if we wanted to sue anybody, we can go after the people who have the money. And if we're looking at a case for reparations from a historical perspective, it all lines up with the Democratic Party. Now, last thing I'll say, from anecdotal evidence, whenever I'm in a conversation, I had a great debate with many of conservatives over the reparations debate. And in the beginning of the debate, the audience, the chat is like, who is this Hotep Jesus guy? Get him out of here. But the moment I say Dems must pay, they're like, wait, who is this Hotep Jesus guy? Put a crown on this guy. So when you said that, I'm like, I don't know, Viva. The people are saying they'd love to see the Democratic Party pay for these crimes.
The way you've explained it, which is why, Twitter's not the best place for discourse.
Right.
You present a compelling argument. I can't wait for people who are watching this later to say, oh, but the Democrats weren't racist. The party switched. And that's why the Democrats, I had to look that up. And I read that explanation. The party switched to explain why what we attribute as overtly racist policy, Jim Crow laws, KKK, which was Democrat. I was like, oh, no, the party switched. I now understand they're going to make that same argument in 50 years as relates to how the Democrats became the party of big pharma, censorship, and big government. Presented that way, Hotep, that's a compelling argument. And I would have been amenable also to the other Steelman argument, which I made in my head, which is, no, make Democrats pay for their policy. And if they don't like it, then they'll leave the Democrat Party. It's nice to espouse ideological, utopic policy, but until you have to pay for it out of your own pocket, or when you expect other people to pay for it. So I could have understood that one as well. But yeah, no, it was just a question of principle that it's the Democrats vaccinate everybody versus the Republicans sort of let me choose. And I wouldn't support compelled vaccination, although if I compelled you and your kids, maybe you'd vote for a different policy as well.
Let's talk about that. Democrats want to kill us. Democrats want to kill us in the form of abortion. Millions of black babies a year. The number one killer of black people is Planned Parenthood. Abortion.
People don't know the origins of Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger and Hotep. I had, so do you know who Dr. Eugene Gu is?
No.
He's the active, first of all, this is not a criticism to Eugene. I disagree with very much everything he has to say, but I do think he's turning around. But Eugene Gu, he's a doctor. He's quite active on social media. He's the one who took the knee BLM pose that he has for his banner on his channel. Very much pro-vaccine and safe and effective and all the rest. He came on my channel and we actually had an hour discussion, and I dare say it was productive and very fruitful. And we didn't get into white supremacy, like institutionalized racism, which a lot of people talk about. We ran out of time, but I hope he can come back on and talk about it. But I was going to bring that up. When people who support abortion and people who support Planned Parenthood don't appreciate it was designed as a form of eugenics to prevent black women from having black babies.
Yes.
And people don't understand that, look, I don't know where Planned Parenthood offices are, but I can probably take a reasonable guess.
Yeah.
And it's the same way today. And they cloak it in women's choice. Black women are being forced to have babies. Well, that's the flip side to that is we want to promote black women ending their pregnancies. And instead of educating and bettering the lives through a number of other policies, let's facilitate termination of pregnancies. Sorry. That's,
yeah. And one of the arguments that they make is the irresponsibility of hospitals to be able to deliver a baby. A lot of black babies are killed in the hospital because of the failure of the medical system. And there's a lot to be said there, and I promote having home births. But I want to come back to another thing you said about reparations would become a tax for white folks. I think that take can be construed as racist and myopic, and I'm gonna show you how. Let me take away racist and let me call it more narcissistic. Let's call it that. Because you know what? The fact of the matter is, if we pass the reparations bill federally here, my black ass going to have to pay the tax too in the form of inflation. So it's not just whites that are going to have to pay reparations. And that was one of my arguments where I said, you know, I don't know about reparations, because if they issue this, it's going to come in the form of inflation, and black people are going to be paying that tax. And we know inflation is a form of tax. So that's why I say when white people say, oh, I don't want to pay it, it's like, bro, you think you're the only one paying the tax? I'm going to have to pay the tax too.
Well,
on my own reparations.
It's people don't think that there's no, it was Thomas Sowell who said there's no right or wrong. There's only trade-offs. I mean, people don't understand that. First of all, the government doesn't do anything without it costing everybody something. It doesn't happen. Yeah. But no, I look at it. As far as the reparations go, my underlying principle is if you cannot right a historical wrong without creating a present wrong, that's not going to be evolution. That will be regression. So how do you make up for it? You know, there's certain analogies here between. I take it back to what I know. You know, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, which is the right of return, and where, you know, the hardliners say we want the right of return for everyone and their descendants. In which case you go back to Israel, and then the state of Israel doesn't exist. Yeah. Setting aside whether or not one believes that a Jewish state of Israel should exist in the first place, the idea of like reparations, if you can identify the actual lineage of people who had their assets, and their body is the most fundamental asset taken from the government, and we support the idea that anybody with a demonstrable wrong can exercise that right against the government, well, then we're talking about reparations for all wronged citizens, and not just one demographic that's going to create racial and political strife among two demographics.
But that sounds like all lives matter talk. And that's the thing that sort of now, it doesn't bother me, but, you know, put my shoes in, you know, some of the black people's in the black community, they would go, that sounds like all lives matter talk, because we're not talking about that, right? For example, if I say women should be able to cook, somebody will respond and say, well, men should be able to cook. Well, duh, but we're not talking about that right now. We're talking about women. Women should be able to cook. So if I say black folks should have reparations, they'll say, well, all people should have reparations. Well, duh, but we're not talking about that right now. We're talking about this specific group.
To which I would respond, okay, so what whoever would say that is saying, I don't care about gay lives. Like, we're not talking about that right now. Well, the gay group's going to come and say, why aren't you talking about that right now? The idea that we're not talking about that right now is itself somewhat exclusionary. Now, I guess I'm very fortunate to have not been socially active when the Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter versus White Lives Matter debate took off. Yeah. I know that I would have been an All Lives Matter individual, and unapologetically so. Uh-oh. And when Kanye, it's it. When Kanye came out with his shirt that said White Lives Matter, my issue with that was that's overtly provocative, because that's making the same distinction that need not be made. Right. The All Lives Matter is the all inclusive. And when someone would come up and say, well, that's not what the discussion is right now, and now we're talking about, you know, black history in America. Well, I was like, well, isn't that convenient? What about all the other people who have been wronged by the very same government in different ways? We'll talk about them when we talk about them. But right now, you know, this is my question. That may be your question, but the broader question is the human one. And so, yes, I'm not running around
about that.
Well, I'm not running around with a shirt that says All Lives Matter either, because I'm not out there to be provocative. But you know, that is my response. And the defense, well, we're not talking about that right now, is a very convenient response to not addressing the underlying issue. It's government abuse that affects everybody in one form or another through one iteration or another. And it's convenient. And what's the word I'm looking for? It would be very, what's the word I'm looking for? Just say, I'll leave it at convenient to say, well, we're talking about my history and not your history right now. And your history, you know, it'll wait. Well, there's some groups who might say that's somewhat unfair.
Well, I like what you said before, right? Let's have that human aspect, because when you have the human aspect, the same argument could come in for somebody who wants to affirm their Second Amendment rights. You know, if they say, hey, you know, we want our gun rights to be affirmed, and somebody comes along and says, well, we want Medicare for all. And it's like, well, we ain't talking about Medicare for all right now. We're talking about guns. It depends on who's having a conversation, which comes to my main point, is that a lot of these conversations are propelled, maintained, sustained by committees. for you have the gay community, very strong lobbying groups. They've been able to organize and get behind whatever it is agenda that they want to push, and they've been very successful, right? So I think when we look at the reparations thing, there are legitimate Black committees that are pushing this thing. And the human aspect I'm saying is, if the gay community says, we want the right to get married, I love it. More power to you. Love who you love. I'm not going to say, well, I want to get married to a goat, because there's some people that want that, which is fucking weird as shit. And I don't know if that should be legal. But anyway.
who was it? Who was it? Well, I know Cenk Uygur made the joke once upon a time that, bestiality should be legal. I also think that was somewhat of a troll. I don't think he was being sincere in that, but forget the slippery slope argument. But actually, just the gay rights is a good example, where they say we want the right to marry.
Yeah.
If there were, I can't think of an example. If there were another group that is not, a minor with an adult who said, well, we're also excluded from marriage, we want the right to marry too, and then the gay lobby says, well, we're not talking about your right to marriage right now. I'm convinced if there were any other group so affected as were gays when they wanted the right to get married, they would have said, come lobby together. It's not a gay issue. This is a fundamental human issue. I'm convinced that would have happened. I just don't know.
The same thing for abortion rights, right? Like, I'm pro-choice. I don't think the government should be able to tell people that they cannot have an abortion.
Until when, though, Hotep? That's the question.
Well, let me tell you why I believe that. Because it sets a very dangerous precedent. Basically, what you're saying is the government gets to tell people when and when they cannot create a life. So you'll have a situation like the movie Demolition Man, where you'll need a license to have a baby, because they'll look at the Supreme Court case and said, hey, we made it illegal to have a baby, which means we are now the overlords of life. We get to say, oh, well, actually, you know what? You can't create a baby. Go get a license. They do it with marriage. Go get a license before you have a baby. And I think that's the slippery slope that we're heading down, is that it's actually the inflation of government in that decision. What would you have to say towards that?
Hold on. I got one dog I got a paralyzed dog, and she's sliding around the room and misplacing my lights. You said pro-life, correct? And not pro-choice.
No, I'm pro-choice.
Hold on a second. That dog just ruined this. Oh, hold on.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Okay, I ran a poll in my community, and I know that there's many more conservatives. There would be many more pro-life than pro-choice. Mm-hmm. But the bottom line in all of this is that I think most people agree to a certain window within which we can either agree on a science, that there's a scientific difference, that it's not from the moment of conception, but from another moment where there's sufficiently not developed human functions. Some people can say, look, it's wrong, and I know that it's wrong, but the alternative to an outright ban is going to be even worse.
Yeah.
But then my only question, I think most people agree that there's a window, and just so long as it's not too harsh and it admits of exceptions, such as the threat, the risk to the woman's life, I don't think many people disagree. Yeah. My only question is, if there's not a hard deadline after which it's not permissible, well, then you're getting into what's that guy's name? The Virginia guy. We're talking about post-birth abortions. So I think in all the things Bill Clinton has done wrong, I think he said one thing right. It might be an evil that nobody likes, but there has to be an availability for. Yeah. But I also agree that safe. What was it? Safe, rare, and what was the third one that used to be the motto? Available, safe, and rare. The chat will know, and I'm not following the chat, but I understand the argument, and I even understand that there has to be a room for choice within a certain window, after which it just you can't allow late-term abortions, in my view. Yeah. So my only question to you is, when is the hard line? Because there has to be a hard line. We all agree there's a hard line. Yeah. Except for some people in California who don't want investigations after, within a month after delivery as to the death of the baby, which means what it means.
That's the hardest thing for me to wrap my mind around. Because thinking about that, it literally makes my stomach turn to know that somebody would have a late term abortion, I'm like, how could a doctor perform that procedure, and how could a woman go have that procedure outside of the anomalies, right? It's disgusting. I'm just so, in that regard, anti-statist. And I always like to look at nature. Sometimes a bird has a baby and she kicks that thing right out the nest. I can't feed all of y'all, you know? So, you know, and that's post-birth, right? Like that's post-birth. Is it gruesome? Is it inhumane? It's absolutely despicable. It's absolutely evil. And I want to say satanic. But I think, like we said before, what's the trade-off? Is it going to come a time where the left has so much power that they're going to tell conservatives, because of this precedent that we set, that guess what? You can't have that baby. And if you have that baby, you're going to have to pay tax on that baby, or we're going to lock you up for that baby. You know, what does that look like? And I think it could lead to totalitarianism and authoritarianism if we're not careful with some of those laws. I think the better thing to do is marketing and advertising, programs. Instead of trying to, and we said this before, where this is a misstep by Democrats, where they're putting more funding into abortion or putting more funding into Planned Parenthood. I think both sides could do a better job in saying, let's look at the real issue in these communities that are having these abortions and find out why are they having, you know, early pregnancy, and start educating this community, supporting this community, job programs, injection into small, VC injections into small business. These sort of things is a better approach over the long term, because just because you make something illegal doesn't mean people aren't going to still do it. They're going to find ways to do it. They're going to go to a state where it's legal. The same thing happens with guns, where they say, oh, we're going to ban guns. Well, you know, the bad guys don't give a damn about gun laws. So like, how effective are laws? You know, that's what it comes back to.
Let's just go back to the bird thing for a second. Late-term abortions, I can only think of a plausible explanation where something went wrong with the fetus or the unborn baby, or I can't even think of where, you know, late term it would pose a risk to the mother. That I don't know how that could happen. Conceptually, I could see that happening. Yeah. But look, humans are humans, and they're not rabbits, they're not birds, and kicking a baby out of kicking a bird out of a nest may be nature, but humans have laws against murder. And it's unpopular in my milieu, because I do think there has to be some window open and some exceptions available, but there has to be a hard line in late term. Yeah, look, it's not hard to imagine that it should happen. It's actually totally logical given some other laws that are already on the books. Yeah. You know, the idea that you could be charged for murder in California if you get into an accident and, you know, kill a pregnant woman's baby in the womb, but that the mother can decide to do it late term, and then it's not illegal. So the only thing that makes it murder versus not murder is the intent of the person who carries it out. That's not a coherent view of murder in the first place. So I have a better law. You ready? Oh, let's hear this. I want to abolish all forms of socialism and communism. I want to abolish the entire Democratic Party. And with that, I believe abortion would go away, because a lot of these programs are government funded. So if you didn't have the government funding of these things, in fact, early pregnancy or pregnancy in the Black community often happens because the woman knows the government will take care of her. So I think if they knew those funds wouldn't be there, if they knew, things might not be so easy to deal with, whether it's abortion or carrying the baby to term, that in a way would eliminate the amount of abortions happening in the country. I think I say you can't outlaw political parties, even if the irony is that by democracy kills itself, because you get a socialist party in there that gets democratically elected, and then they seize power and don't relinquish it. The old expression, you can't vote your way out of tyranny, but you can vote yourself into it. Yeah. I look, the only people who think more government is in the long run a good thing are the blue pills, and they need to be woken up. Yeah. The people who today say the government would never lie to you about a medicine, the government would never, the government wouldn't tell you misinformation. First of all, they're blue pilled. I might call them bird brain at this point. Just, the government's done it in real time, but yes, you know, it's the ultimate irony of certain policy is that it ends up exacerbating the problem that's, you know, supposedly intended to resolve or solve.
Yeah.
And that just seems to be the MO of government.
Yeah.
But policy wise, you know, I think all of us are pro-life.
Yes.
And all of us are pro-choice to some extent. I know there are people, and I don't judge them.
Yeah.
And I don't call them religious fanatics, who believe it's the moment is from conception.
Yeah.
It's a laudable perspective to take.
Yeah.
And in an ideal world, you know, I still think exceptions should be made for rape, incest. Then it's a question of, you know, the time frame within which that happens, and you have to balance potential adverse consequences. You say rape and incest are exceptions to the window.
Yeah.
Well, then you're going to have a lot of people fabricating rape and incest accusations to get the abortion outside of that window. So there's realities to deal with there. But
yeah,
I think we are all ultimately pro-life in that, in an ideal world, we would like it to be from conception. The practical side says there has to be some window, and then there's the demonic side that says those TikTok videos where you hear people reveling in their abortions.
Yeah.
And like taking pleasure out of it. There's a demonic side of it on the far end of the spectrum, but I think by and large most people have a reasonable take. Have to come.
I like what you said, but I think there's a moral argument and then a legal argument. You know, I think we're 100% on the same page with the moral argument. With the legal argument, you know, if I had to be the guy in the room to make that decision, I'd be sweating like a whore in church.
I have never heard that expression in my life. Sweating like a whore in church?
No, like a whore in church.
Oh my God. Well, I'm sorry. I can understand why I've never heard of that expression now. I've never heard like a whore in synagogue. At least I get it. I get the expression. Okay.
Yeah. It'd be hard for me, you know, and it comes back to my argument. I have an argument against reparations, and it's like, anytime you allow the government to draw up a bill, you're going to get a bill. You know, you're going to have to pay for it somehow. You know, it's going to come out of your ass, you know, as you might say in the Black community. So, you know, when we ask for reparations, I'm like, are you sure you want to ask the government for another thing? Because it hasn't worked out too well in the past.
Hotep, I'm curious. Like, I don't think there's homogeneity in any demographic or any, you know, community. What flack do you take from both ends of the political spectrum within the Black community for the things that you believe?
Bro, so the far right thinks I'm too black. I'm too black nationalist, and the far left thinks I'm a black white supremacist. So like, I think I just look at things from a very nuanced perspective. I'm looking at all sides of things. You know, the way I view the political spectrum is I view it not as left and right, not as Andrew Breitbart said, where it's a circle. I actually view it as a sphere. And at the center of a sphere is statism. And the further you get away from the center, the less government you want in your life. For example, when we look at the left and the right, well, the right wants more government as far as policing is concerned. And the left, in that regard, wants less government. But the left wants more government as far as like social programs are concerned, right? So it's like, how much state do you want in your life is really the political argument. And I went from didn't know where I was to anti-status to now like I'm a status if I'm the dictator. Right?
You know, rich or poor, it's good to be the king. There's an expression in this summer. Hotep, hold on, this light is driving me absolutely crazy.
Yeah. And we're gonna get to super chats in just a moment here.
Yeah, no. There's when people talk about, you know, white privilege. I mean, it may be very unpopular to say as well. I've never bought into the argument of white privilege. There's political privilege and there's economic privilege, and that again, there may be some overlapping in terms of economics in Western societies. But I tell you, it's not white privilege, because there's plenty of examples where that's not the case. But it sure as hell is political privilege, because white or black, it's good to be in government, and you know, white or black, Asian, whatever, it's good to have money. And then the only question is whether or not certain groups are cut out of fair access to that based on race. And that gets to the question of institutionalized racism and whether or not it exists, today, whether or not there's, what is it called? Like leftovers. Oh my goodness. I only know the word in French now and it makes no sense. Reliquat. Oh, whether or not there are residuals of what was, in fact, once upon a time, actual institutionalized racism. And look, I'll get another question for you, Hotep. Is in the modern times today, do you believe in what many people refer to as institutionalized racism?
Yes, and it all comes from the Democratic Party.
Okay, now this is it. Now, by the way, and I was talking with my brother earlier today. He's also a lawyer. We're 4 lawyers of 5 kids, and my dad is a lawyer. And I said, tongue in cheek, I can steel man the institutionalized racism argument, and I've raised it facetiously with Justin Trudeau, the man who's not racist and not misogynist, but implements policy which has a disparate impact on Black Canadians, Latino Canadians, and women. And so I say facetiously, almost tongue in cheek, well, you are racist because your vaccine mandate disparately impacts Black Canadians. And when I made my protest video and I went to Canadian Tire, which is sort of like a Walgreens type store, and sure enough, I go there, the only people I see who couldn't get in to Canadian Tire because they had to show a vaccine passport was I believe a Nigerian family just sitting out there. Like I knew why they weren't allowed in. They knew why they weren't allowed in. Now, do I believe that that's actually institutionalized racism or just institutionalized, government fucks everything up? I'd go with the latter. But when you in the States, when you see Biden saying we're outlawing menthol cigarettes because it's the cigarette of choice for the Black community, I can steel man the argument of institutionalized racism in the States because that reeks of institutionalized racism, of the soft bigotry, of low expectations. Like we need to protect the Black community because they don't have the same faculties to pick the cigarettes of their choice.
Yes, yes. When Biden said, if you don't vote for me, you ain't Black. That's an example. I'm going to add to this. I'm going to give you a really strong argument here. Power is when you get to control the identity of a people, okay? And this is what Democrats and mainstream media are very good at. What people, specifically red whites and blue whites, their perception of the Black community is way off. When I say way off, I mean way off. And it's because mainstream media, liberals, Democrats, have carefully selected a group of bootlicking Negroes to represent us. I'm not going to name any names, but we know who these people are. When we look at the Black people that are placed on TV to speak for Black people, we used to have leaders like Malcolm X. We used to have leaders, and I want to touch on the white privilege. We used to have leaders like Khalid Muhammad. These type of individuals. Malcolm X, he was murdered. But these leaders are not put on Fox News. Well, I should say, I am. Fox News has me on. I should say leftist media, CNN, these types. They give us a very one-sided view. And it makes people think this is how Black people think. Don Lemon doesn't represent us. Tiger Woods doesn't represent us. Serena Williams doesn't represent us. None of these people actually represent the views of the Black community. In fact, anybody who does carry those views are gaslit because these are the mainstream ideas. For example, last month, Black History Month, I had a friend send me an image of a 9-year-old girl who was in school with a coloring book, coloring sheets. On one page, it had LGBT. On the next page, it had trans rights. And this was with the Black Power fist up during Black History Month. We had Gabrielle Union go up in front of the NAACP Image Awards and give this, valiant speech about trans rights. When we had Black Lives Matter come to the forefront, we had them remove Black men from their verbiage. In the Villages section, if you go on the Wayback Machine, it says mothers, parents, children, completely omitting Black men from the conversation completely. We had The Root. The Root was bought out by Huffington Post, and they published an article that said Black men are the white people of Black people. Now, when you tell me that there's no institutionalized racism, yet I see black men specifically in the black community specifically being targeted like this by black bootlicking shills, I go, it's not in the form that they're saying it is, but it's there. They're controlling our narrative, and that's power.
It is, again, Hotep, you make a compelling argument, because the miscommunication typically is semantics, where when people talk about institutionalized racism, they talk about like Harvard not allowing, like exclusion of blacks and Jews from medical school, whatever. But as you say this out loud, yes, you'll call it, and it looks like an iteration of institutionalized racism, and I just call it institutionalized exploitation.
Sure.
It is interesting. Like the second I heard, who was it? The LA Times referred to Larry Elder as the black face of white supremacy. I mean, I didn't consider that to be institutionalized racism at the time. I just considered that to be racism.
Well, now we have to define. Well, what do you mean by racism? How do you define that when you use that term? Because I define the term as once you start segmenting based upon race.
Yeah, it's preferential, or I mean, I do think it is either preferential or detrimental treatment based on religion, or preferential or not deferential, but rather negative expectations based on race.
See, that's where I part, right? Because racism is the only word with ism that involves emotion. Every other ism, like classism, there's no emotion attached to classism. There's no emotion attached to Buddhism, Catholicism. It's only emotion attached to racism. And that's why I part. I go, no, racism is the study of race, the segmentation of race, talking about things based upon race. We have to not let them attach emotion to the term racism, because then it becomes subjective, and it's not subjective. It's an objective thing. For example, I can't get on Hot 97. Ebro Darden has specifically said I'm not allowed at Hot 97, a predominantly black station. When I listened to the messaging coming out of predominantly New York hip hop radio, what did they push out? All day proliferation of the jab. All day long, commercial after commercial. That, to me, when you specifically target a group based upon race, that is racism, removing the emotionalism and just talking about the scientific view of it. We are targeting this community because they are apprehensive for the inoculation, and we must convince them otherwise, but to their detriment.
Yeah, I can see the argument that would be an illustration of institutionalized racism. I mean, I guess it just depends on what one understands by the institution, what one means by the institution. Typically, we mean it as a structural social system, and not necessarily as one element of it, like media, radio, etc. And now that you think of it, like it's a basic question: what's racism? If one were to say you have to treat people differently based on their propensity for certain types of illnesses, well, that's racism without the emotion. That's biology. Some groups are prone to Tay-Sachs sickle cell anemia and need to know that as much. But the idea when they say, well, we look at a black person and we expect certain things of them, or we treat them differently where race is not otherwise a relevant factor, is where you get into the racism.
Yeah,
it's a good question. But now hold on one second.
Okay.
Your gripe with the radio station is predicated on the idea that the jab is fundamentally bad for you, which I think science is beginning to agree. It's certainly not value added for most people at this point. I think science is beginning to acknowledge that. But what were you you're specifically not allowed on because of your stance on the jab?
No, it didn't have anything to do with that. It's just, what I'm saying is there's a specific viewpoints that are allowed on mainstream news. For example, when I pulled my Starbucks stunt, like I called that week before. I said, y'all, if you ever really want to get a black man on the news, just take a liberal stance and you'll be their hero. And that's what I did the very next week. I did exactly that just to demonstrate it, and I went viral. Like, the left thought I was on their side till they realized there was a troll. Jesus and Mero, I would have never made Jesus and Mero. Jesus and Mero did a whole segment on it because they thought I was serious. They thought I was really out there trying to get reparations, but really I was just making fun of, the current racial relations in America. But my point is, when you can take somebody like myself and make me an enemy of black people, that is institutionalized racism, because you get to control how people view themselves. And they can only look at things through one lens, and that's the democratic, liberal, socialist lens. And it's being controlled by money, and it's being controlled by communists and socialists, because they love to latch themselves onto minority and struggling groups. And they've been doing that since the beginning of their start. But that's what I would call institutionalized racism, the control of black people. This is modern slavery. This is evolved slavery. They're controlling us. And I don't have a voice in my own people. I will never be on Black Enterprise Magazine. I will never be at NAACP Awards. They will never, ever allow. Black media don't reach out to me. They act like I don't exist, but I've been on every major platform you can think of, from Rogan to Fox to Tim Pool, and now I'm talking to one of the greatest Jews to ever live, Viva Frei.
No, but I'll tell you something else. And first of all, okay, we might. No, there's no disagreement here. I think when it comes to the term institutionalized racism, as you're describing it, versus racism, we're going to agree. I think the distinction might be without a difference. No one's going to disagree that, and I've made the argument. It is definitely racism.
Yeah,
it's racism through whatever. The only question is whether or not someone thinks that's the institution that they hold to be the institution of all institutions.
Yeah,
but yeah, look, it's racism, and whether or not it's just of the institution, we'll disagree on that qualification, or that's where the disagreement will be.
I'm willing to bend on that.
Yeah, no, but when Biden comes out, like I say, it's policy racism. We're outlawing menthol cigarettes, and the justification was to protect children and to protect the African American community, because that is their cigarette of choice. And I'm like, do you not realize that you just implicitly lumped adult African Americans with children, that they need the watchful eye of the government? And what, they don't get to smoke what they want. So, because whites smoke Marlboros, you're not going to outlaw that as if menthol is worse than. So, yeah, I guess look, we'll agree. That is either institutionalized racism or just racism on its face.
Yeah,
it's very, very, very bad. But the idea that what you're describing now, and someone's going to say you're just angry that you didn't get on these channels. It's beyond that. When I went to look you up, Hotep, what do I get? I get misinformation of stuff that you said, that you discussed ideas that mainstream media finds abhorrent, so they get to demonize you as a conspiracy theorist, so they don't have to address any of the substantive arguments you ever have to raise, so they don't have to address you as a person. I can't imagine anything being much more hurtful than that, in that it's absolutely demeaning of an entire identity. And look, I felt the same in Canada, but I'm not sure which. Yeah, the CBC never really asked to do a meaningful interview with me. They'll interview you when they want to demonize you, but other than that, they don't want to have the discussion.
Yeah, I mean, the same thing happened to King Randall. King Randall opened up a school for black boys called X for Boys. Wonderful organization, wonderful deed. He goes on Roland Martin, and instead of Roland Martin saying, "Wow, like this is a great thing you did," he's trying to do a gotcha, because King Randall doesn't fully align with the Democratic agenda. He's more right than he is left. So it's like, we have to demonize his kid because he happened to stand next to a few conservatives. That is control. When, and the arrogance was shown by Biden when he said, if you don't vote for me, you ain't black.
You ain't black. And Hotep, it makes me so angry, but I don't want to protest for other people who, I don't want to look like I'm trying to pull a white knight savior thing.
Yeah.
He didn't just say you're not. He has to then go with what he thinks is the vernacular of the group that that just blew my mind as much as Hillary Clinton, talking about the hot sauce in her purse. Now, I like hot sauce. It's just, it's so flipping pandering. But and people are going to say, Viva, I'm trying to think of an example to grill the right the way we're, mutually grilling the left, but they both don't do it to the same extent if they both do it at all.
Yeah.
The right, I don't think, comes out and calls any Democrat black politician mouthpieces or tools of the regime, whereas it's systematic. And I've seen it. I'm trying to think of who it was. I'm not going to remember the name of the individual, nor can I remember the name of who said it. But the blackface of white supremacy and the terms that they use to describe black Republicans as if they don't know what's good for them and they need the watchful eye of the Democrats. I guess I can actually now be convinced that is Democrat institutionalized racism. It's political racism. It's just the racism inherent with their policies. It's all treating a demographic like they don't know what's good for themselves, and anyone who thinks that they do has been led astray by the devil.
Let me ask you one question, and we're going to go to super chats, and you can hang out or part, depending on your time schedule today. Who are the black intellectuals that you think the black population of America can look to for guidance and leadership today? Give me your top 5 alive.
Let me think here. I mean, so Thomas Sowell is the easy one.
Okay, he's still alive.
Yep. Dave Chappelle is the not obvious one, and I'll say this because Chappelle is listening to his comedy bit. It's not just comedy; it's modern day philosophy. It just has to be delivered in stand-up humor.
Yes.
And Chappelle espouses the principles that everyone should live by, and his bit, which was not a bit about the trans and like raising the hypocrisy through tolerance. I don't think it can be. It can't be underestimated. It can't be undervalued in terms of what he was getting at. So he's a modern day philosopher and a good example of everything. Now I feel like I'm putting myself because I have to now find I mean, I'm trying to think of politicians.
Now name top 5 white intellectuals.
I've never looked at it through this. I'm just trying to think of people who I would look up to for advice. Okay, look at it. Only because he's been on my radar for the last week. I met him last week in the Rumble event. Russell Brand. I'm listening to his book now called Recovery.
Okay.
And not for don't anybody read into it. I'm not reading it for any other reason than I thought it was the autobiography, but it's actually just the 12 steps of recovery through his life. Some of the most insightful stuff out there.
Brilliant guy.
I'm shocked, and I listen to books. I don't read them anymore. And I'm running and I hear Russell Brand in my ears. The book is something that everybody should read, and it really makes me want to understand the 12 principles even more than I'm going to afterwards. And then I'll just take the obvious one also, Joe Rogan. Now everyone's going to say you got 4 men and no women. Let me hold on. Got to think now. Now I'm going to feel Tulsi Gabbard. Okay, there actually. And
Tulsi Gabbard made the list.
Tulsi Gabbard made the list. Now I haven't seen her in a long time, but back
Tulsi Gabbard's
4 years ago. Well, no, I liked the stand against the Democrat institution. Now, it's true. My admiration for Tulsi Gabbard is 4 years old. I haven't been following her as much these days.
Tulsi Gabbard's an android, bro. I don't think she's human. She's an android.
I think I need to ask what you mean now in terms of politics or in terms of demeanor.
Just demeanor.
Okay.
Like I'm just cracking jokes. Yeah.
No, I liked her. I mean, I think I like Glenn Beck is decent. I'm trying to think of not obvious choices. Hold on. And Carrie Lake. Let me just take a good political candidate. Okay. Carrie Lake. I don't care. I don't care that she said certain things in ways that I wouldn't necessarily say them. Determination, grit, and as far as a politician goes, that natural, sincere demeanor that so many politicians could use, but are so wildly lacking.
Okay. So my point is, when it's time to talk about intellectual matters, who did Democrats trot out? Cardi B.
Well, it's even worse than that. I mean, I don't want to pick on anybody.
And I love Cardi B. Let me just preface.
Van Jones. They bring out Van Jones and
Van Jones.
Van Jones has said some good things, but I think he's has been blinded by race as the the blinders of life.
Yes. Yes.
Who else did they trot out?
And let me just, while you're thinking, I love Cardi B, but I think her being an entertainer doesn't leave her much time for intellectual matters, to really do the studies and read through all the work of Saul, Walter Williams, and whoever else, you know, Milton Friedman. She frankly doesn't have the time, and I know that because I was in the entertainment industry. So it's no, I don't really fault her, but I'm not looking to Cardi B for the intellectual matters. But that's who the Democratic Party calls to when it's time to speak to the Black community.
Well, I mean, have you've seen Idiocracy?
No.
Shut the front door, Hotep.
Listen,
after this is over,
I just found out white culture exists. Okay, I used to be a Black nationalist. I don't know. I'm
my
just getting
goodness!
caught up.
Well, you have to go right now. I don't know if you can get it
What's
off
it called?
YouTube. Idiocracy.
Okay.
Oh, if the chat is not roasting you right now, it's a classic. It's a. Oh, come on, President Camacho, Terry Crews. You're going to go nuts when you watch it. It's a movie from, I think, 2001. I forget what there's an interesting story behind its release. It became a cult classic because it wasn't successful at the time. We're living through an era of idiocracy, and now I'm almost reluctant to explain why. This has nothing to do with Cardi B. This has to do with culture at large. Okay. Stupidity is being rewarded.
Yes.
Idiocy is being valorized, and victimhood has now become the ultimate measure of success. You put all those three things together, you don't get evolution, you get regression, which is what we're seeing. The only question is it going to be regression to like the fall of the Roman Empire type regression, or is just the pendulum going to swing back and you're going to have a new generation of conservative? It's going to be red-pilled kids who can say boys have penises, girls have vaginas, and every now and again there's a medical anomaly that deserves all the respect of every human. We either get back to that universe, or we're going to continue going down the path of drag shows for kindergarten kids. And if you say that that's a problem, you're a bigot.
Yeah. That's a very scary future. I don't know where we're going, but that's the fork I'm looking at when I analyze our country.
Because it's getting worse faster and quicker. But I think people are starting to like be to use a Simpsons expression, embiggened to say enough is enough. Have you watched The Simpsons?
Yes, I've seen The Simpsons.
Okay, that was when embiggened was a perfectly cromulent word. But no, I think a lot of people are now just feeling emboldened, empowered to just speak common sense. And because you say a boy is a boy and a girl is a girl does not mean you're going to treat anybody differently. But what it does mean is you don't allow kids to make life-altering decisions with their body when their brains aren't fully developed. And you're not benevolent for saying that they should have the right to do that. You're actually espousing monstrous beliefs. When more people feel comfortable, and I think it's getting there, we'll have a turning of the tide. So hopefully.
So where's this coming from? Where's this drag queen story hour stuff coming from, and why is it happening? Is there an agenda? What's your take on this?
Look, I don't espouse it. I can certainly understand it. A lot of people think depopulation is the underlying goal of a lot of stuff. So screw with kids' abilities to make kids and families to have families, and you'll reduce population. I'm not there, although I understand it. I just think it's the end result of, when virtue and victimhood become the ultimate commodity or the ultimate currency, that's where it goes, because everybody's looking for a way to purport to be a victim. And in order to continue to be a victim in a victimhood society, well, it's got to get more and more outlandish as to what qualifies as victimhood, because it's got to keep evolving. So now it's discrimination not to let drag queens and trans people dance in front of kids because it shows you're intolerant. And so it's going to be people's virtue and people's desire to be perceived as tolerant that's going to lead them to the road to hell real fast. But with the Matt Walshes of the world and the Candace Owens of the world, people will just feel empowered to speak common sense. And may we see a rebirth. It'll be the Renaissance. It'll be a rebirth of common sense.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, I like that take, and I think that definitely speaks to psychologically why a lot of people attach themselves to a lot of these movements. I'm gonna read through. I think we have 20 plus super chats here. You can stick around, or you can head out. I know you're a very busy guy, but I'm gonna.
I'll Read through them just in case there's any that affect me. And
Right.
my wife is getting the kids anyhow, so I'm good for a few more minutes.
Okay, cool. Let's do this. Inside of the Ages, thank you. He said this is for HJ putting in that work. First-rate content, and I'm here for it. Much love. You are crushing this. Much needed grift. Hotep and Bill.
Hotep.
Canon Hotep, he said, Hotep, salute to the OG Viva Frei. Now, Canon Hotep is the one that texted me. He was like, I knew about Viva before I knew about you, Hotep Jesus.
It's surreal. I mean, it makes me feel good in a superficial and vain way, but thank you.
I remember you did a video once on some law case, and I didn't know your name. And I'm typing through a YouTube, like, curly-haired lawyer trying to find the video.
Yeah, that was back in the day. People want me to get back to the car vlogs when I would sit in my car and
yes,
do
it was the car vlog one.
Short
Yeah,
videos. Those are very, very, they're time consuming and not as productive as, a live stream talking about 6 items, but I've been meaning to get back to them. So
yeah,
I'll keep.
Those are hard to do, man, because you got to take the time to edit them and plan them.
It's 5 hours for one subject, and then I'm not up to speed on 6 other things. So
yeah, that's why I stopped doing
that, and like reciting the lines and sitting there and starting over and over again. It's also anxiety inducing. But
yeah, I used to do my videos like that, and my channel did really well, and it did poor when I did live streams. But I'm like, this works for my time. Yeah. Viva Francois Legal. What does that mean? I don't know what that means. Crawley RR, Scott's book, How to Fail Changes Lives. I think Scott's a great guy, man.
Yeah. He's smart, and his books are great. I read Loser Think is something everybody should read.
Yeah.
And How to Fail at Everything and Win Bigly was a great book as well.
Yeah. Jonah Ryan said, Viva, I've told you on your show, the RCMP kidnapped the indigenous kids, and PT said they want to live in the ghettos they can. Shout out Jonah Ryan. That's my Canadian guy. Check out Scott's YouTube from this morning. That was fire. Jonah Ryan. Oh, and when I say they napped, sorry, I forgot code. But 500-page apology to the RCMP acknowledges as much. Boris Kofievich says Scott also self-identified in 2016 as a Hillary voter for his safety. He also claimed for a couple of years now he was going to retire by being canceled. None of this is accidental.
Well, it is. And look, I forgot to mention it's true. Scott has been overt about his previous attempts to get canceled. He was trying to get canceled over the jab. He's made multiple attempts. So I think he might just be surprised that this is the one that did
it. You know what? Being canceled is a blessing in many ways, because like that's like the height of your career, really, is when you're canceled, because that's when people who don't know who you are start knowing who you are. Because otherwise you sort of stay inside your own little demographic. But in order to break the bubble, sometimes, you need, Joe Rogan helps with that. Like he broke me out of whatever bubble I was in. But sometimes being canceled helps with that. Crawley R said, Scott started the convo on me, media, DEI, ESG, CRT, and teachers union. Jay did. Number 1 and 2. When does Scott not try to further racial division? He always backtracks after. I think he's just trying to stir the pot, and I like the tactic of stirring the pot. I like the tactic of stirring the pot because, well, I got the benefit.
I would not go out of my way to get canceled.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I wouldn't go out of my way to get canceled for something I don't believe in. I mean, so I wouldn't say something to be deliberately provocative if I didn't believe in it. Right. And nor am I out of there. I'm not trying to get canceled regardless. And, I think when it happens for absurd reasons, that's when you'll see exponential growth. I do wonder if Scott's going to, as far as exposure goes, have a net positive from this. I think everybody knew Scott already. What I feel bad about is that, the legacy of Dilbert, and I think it has to weigh on Scott. Like it's nice to say I did it on purpose. This is not an accident, and I knew what I was doing. But knowing what the legacy of Dilbert is going to be now because of the media that's going to just write it off as a footnote from a racist, that's got to hurt. And maybe history will not be written that way. We'll see.
Yeah. I don't know. I just think sometimes, stirring the pot is the way to make things come to the surface. That was kind of nice analogy.
That's damn beautiful. Has nobody said that before?
just like that.
That's poetry.
Don't steal it, Viva. Don't steal it.
Don't.
I want my credit, damn it.
Proof of creation is right here. That's amazing.
Jonah Ryan said, don't forget Trudeau's dad was the last PM to open a res school. I think you mentioned that. Everyone should look into his 1969 white paper on the residential schools. Topic sets me off. Cuban libertarian said, ecological fallacy. Attributing characteristics of a group to an individual, heuristics, mental shortcuts for solving problems quickly for a good enough result given time constraints. Intelligent. He said Ted Kaczynski and Jacques, I don't know how to say that, were right. I love that paper Ted wrote. Oh my God, on industrialization, amazing. Tune in and drop out. Framing is everything. White people don't owe black people reparations. However, there are governments and corporations who ADOS could make a claim for reparations. See, I told you, it's all these different groups, man. You got FBA, which is Foundational Black American. You got ADOS, which is American descendants of slavery. There's a lot of factions out here, Viva, man. I can't even keep up with the reparations movement, man. That's why when people ask me, I'm like, I don't know, man. I'm trying to just keep up. Viva, did you see Trudeau government authorized cocaine production in BC?
Cocaine? Oh, sorry. Were you reading it? A narcotic production in BC?
Yeah, I don't know what BC is. British Columbia?
British Columbia. They just legalized possession of small amounts of narcotics in British Columbia. So it's amazing. The government just wants to be the drug dealer. The government just wants to have the monopoly on criminality. It's outrageous. They want to sell the marijuana, a lot. Oh, anyway, it's liberal, by the way. And if you think that possession of narcotics should be illegal, you're an old school conservative. You're not a liberal, tolerant Canadian.
What do you think? Should it be legal or illegal?
I think the penalties should be reasonable. You should obviously prioritize rehab versus incarceration, and you should allow judges extenuating factors on sentencing. I now understand why minimum sentencing guidelines are a big problem, specifically because of the disparate impact they can have on certain groups, and also the type of crime. But illegalizing narcotics, even in small amounts for personal possession, is not going to make anything better.
Yeah.
Period.
There's this one native tribe, and what they used to do with their criminals was they would start a hug huddle. So if you stole something, did something wrong, the whole community would come together and everybody would hug you and they throw you a party. And I thought that was a fascinating approach. I guess the real underlying message there is that the person is suffering from something and only love can heal.
Yeah, there'll be some exceptions or limits to that, but
it's going to be exceptions to the rule. Some of you got to go.
Some crimes, some criminals do not heal from their propensities to commit the specific crime, but
yeah. I think the for some of those people, pedophiles, rapists, I think those people should be donated to science. Jonah Ryan, HJ, talking about Dem racism and forgot about Woodrow. Oh, motherfucking Woodrow Wilson. Oh, man. Talk about worst presidents ever. Democrat. I need reparations for Woodrow Wilson, Viva.
I'm Canadian. My knowledge of I've been learning a lot about American history and politics, but it's been a sharp learning curve over the last 4 years. Woodrow, I'll have to go look up. My only reference to Woodrow Wilson is from The Simpsons again. I'm joking, people.
World War I, Federal Reserve. Oh, this guy. Oh, I'm not Federal Reserve. The 1913 Act. This is all Woodrow, man. He was a cuck, bro. Heavily influenced by Winston Churchill. Oh my! He was in my book. I wrote. Oh my God! I call Biden Woodrow Wilson 2.0, man, because he's not really the guy in charge. Jonah Ryan, if you want to terminate your child's life, that's your conscience. Don't lie about what the procedure is, then rock and roll. I agree with that. Don't lie about the procedure. Yeah, they love to sugarcoat what's really happening, and the procedure of abortion is disgusting. Jonah Ryan, late term equals profit for parts. Isaiah Brothers.
That's the other. Well, that would be the argument against abortion, allowing it at all. The black market it creates for body parts, which was one of my almost doom pill revelations of this world as to the depths of depravity that people are capable of.
Yeah, that's disgusting. I got a few more here, and then we'll be out of here. Cassius Cam, said, prioritizing the collective makes weak individuals. Ooh, prioritizing the individual makes strong collective. Nominate me at grifties.com. Shout out to Cassius Cam.
That's almost as good as stirring the pot brings the stuff to the surface.
Yeah. We got some quotables here, people. Y'all getting your money's worth. Tobias Ruck, he said, number one white intellectual was Hans Hermann Hoppe. Okay, I like that. Phil Moore, as much as I enjoy a red pill guy, people who agree with, this is too much a picnic. Get a topic you guys disagree on and go at each other. What does that even mean, go at each other?
Oh, people want to see conflict. Like, even when I had Eugene Gu on my channel, it wasn't going at each other because that's not, first of all, it's not how you understand another person. And it's also not how you conduct discourse when you don't agree. Eugene Gu came on the channel telling me that, he thinks vaccines are safe and effective. And I'm like, all right, I disagreed with you. And then we had a discussion. It doesn't have to be heated or disrespectful, in my humble opinion, but I'm just the Canadian.
Yeah, I don't make that type of content. I've had people who've come on this channel and have gotten heated, and I try to let them just be that one party, and I just, stay over here in my zone. But, I don't think any one person has all the answers. So I hate dismissing somebody else's opinion because I may disagree with it, but there could be that 10% that they're right about that matters. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, we're not going to do that here. Canon Hotep, Idiocracy is a classic. I've referenced it all the time. Remember to drink Brondo. It has electrolytes.
The stuff plants need. Dude, your afternoon is going to be fantastic, Hotep.
I feel like I'm missing out on something here, man. Jonah Ryan, last two here. He said, HJ, come on, narrative control is all a product of NGOs. Charlie Indigo Alpha. Look into the 1950s Reese Committee. Congress talked about NGO. Jonah knows all of them, man. Jonah says, HJ, the Coke production article is going HBTY now. Oh, man. All right, we'll check that out. Appreciate you. Jonah Ryan is like our in-house genius. He's one of them. Jabari's one of our in-house genius. They just know everything about everything. Ladies and gentlemen, Viva Frei.
Is that me? I'm not used to a soundboard, Hotep. Let me ask you one question. When you went with the name Hotep Jesus, were you not afraid of getting struck by lightning, or are you not superstitious?
Terrified.
Because first of all, I thought it was your real name until I did 5 minutes of research and now I understand the origins of the name. I would say the neurotic person who's fears a god that he may or may not even believe in. I was like, I wondered if you had any.
Well, I've rationalized it. It wasn't a name I gave myself. My haters gave me the name. They came out and they said, "What do you think you are? Some sort of Hotep genius?" And my background is in marketing. Like, that's what I did for a living. And the marketer in me was like, bro, if you don't jump on that.
All right. Good explanation.
I was like, yo, I'm a businessman. I'm a capitalist. But, I understand the history of the name Jesus so well that I can rationalize it. It's not offensive, right? Because when we think about the Bible's originally written in Hebrew. So the name really wasn't Jesus. I believe it's Yahweh. Yod He Vav He, I believe.
Yeah, that would be Yod He Vav He would be. That's how they spell Adonai, actually. But yeah, Jehovah-ish.
Yeah, exactly. And then later on it becomes Joshua and Joseph. Both can be early derivations of the term Jesus. And Jesus is really like some Roman Catholic later on type stuff. Like the name Jesus actually isn't even in the Bible. Because, again, Jesus' father's name was Joseph, and usually sons are named after a dad. So Jesus' name, there's an argument to be made that his real name was Joseph. So anyway, I read a little bit too much, and I become stupid because I read too much. So
here's a good one. An expert is someone who knows more and more about less and less.
Exactly.
I didn't make that up. I did not make that up.
But that's definitely me. Yeah, I appreciate you, man.
thank you for having me on. Like, sincerely, it was great. And look, I'm not going to look at the term institutionalized racism the same way again, and it will at least have an argument that is plausible and legitimate and defensible.
Well,
You made a good one.
I love that, because now I have, or I should say, we have another soldier in the fight against socialists and liberalism, and you have another argument. I need guys like you to have another argument to just tear those guys apart. So we just added to your arsenal.
Absolutely, because when I saw Biden's the cigarette, the illegalizing menthol. I mean, that's when I said, like, this is the perfect example of soft bigotry, of low expectations, or just bigotry. But we got another term for it now.
Yeah, I can't even enjoy a Newport, man. Come on, man. What the hell's going on here, bro? Hold on, where's my soundbite for that? In here somewhere.
Come on, man.
All right, Viva, I'm gonna let you go, man. Everybody,
right.
go subscribe to Viva Frei. Subscribe to my channel. Hotep Con tickets on sale right now. HotepNation.com. Come hang out with us. Working on sponsorship now, so maybe we'll be able to afford to bring somebody big out there. But either way, come hang out with us. Hotep Con this year, August 17th to the 20th. Ahern Hotel, HotepNation.com. I'll see you guys later.
Didn't listen to me then, I bet they feel me now. Time don't let me lose it. The booth not about to prove it. I said goes and pursue it. You the best to never do it. Invest my money talking fluent, stupid, ducking the Judas. It broke my heart, but over my eyes, you have no honor, I have no choice. Chasing the commas till I'm gone. I've been left for a minute. On my way home, mama, I promise, got caught up in it. Damn. Everybody eats when I'm batting at the plate. First, second, third, home, $1 million bet.